All right. Hi, everyone. Uh, at this point, we're going to be moving on to pivot tables, which is something that you might recall from the Pandas Part 2 lecture. All right, so what is a pivot table? Basically, it allows you to cut down a large data set and aggregate data based on functions that you want to use, such as min, max, sum, average, count, things like that. So again, if you can recall the functionality from the Pandas Part 2 lecture, it functions in a really similar way in Sheets and Excel. But the advantage of using it in Sheets is that there are a lot more ways to filter, and you can instantly like manipulate the table to how you want it. So let's move on to how that kind of works. So the basic process of creating a pivot table in Excel is you just want to click on any cell within the data set, go to the top of the screen, select data, and then pivot table. So this creates just a blank pivot table canvas. It's in a new page of the spreadsheet, and it might show some suggestions on the right-hand side. So let's get into a demo, and let's kind of do that right now. All right, so today, right now, the data that we have for you to work with is this NBA data set. So as you can see, there's a lot of different columns of data. So there's a lot of different ways you might want to cut this down or aggregate this. You can see there's about 530 rows and somewhere close to 30 different columns. So there's definitely a lot that we can do to cut this down. All right, so again, the basic process is you just click on any one of these cells in the data set and go to data up here and then click on pivot table. So now what this does is it basically says it's going to take every row and every column in this data set and create a new pivot table. So we want to create this in a new sheet, so we'll just go ahead and do that. All right, perfect. And looks like we have our blank pivot table canvas, just as we said. And as before, there are suggestions here. So before we kind of get into these, let's go into what these different attributes of the table are. So basically rows and columns, you're going to want to choose two different columns from the original table, and these values will make up the rows and columns respectively of the pivot table. So you want to pick values here that are not unique. And what that means is you don't want to pick, like in the context of this table, you don't want to pick something like, um, let's say, points, because there's so many different types of values that this could be. It's going to be really hard to filter based on that. So for example, if you did select points, it would come up with a row for every single one of these values. So let's just go ahead and see what that would look like. Right. So this is kind of like almost ridiculous. You can see that, as I said, there's going to be a row for every single different point value that somebody averaged in the NBA this season. And as you can see, there's a lot there, and this doesn't really do that much to help with cutting down, as is what we wanted to do before. So something that might be a little better might be age perhaps, or position, or team maybe, even games played and games started, but those might not really be as useful as, maybe these three. So let's go ahead and pick one of these. Let's say we want to filter by position, right? So basically what we do is we just go to rows, hit add, and find position. So now, as I said before, each of these rows in your pivot table corresponds to a different value from the position column in the original table. So as you can see, there's roughly 10 different positions, 11 different positions here. So we can start filtering a little more now. And with columns, the same kind of criteria works, is that you want to have, a similar type of data in the sense that you want it to be non-unique. So again, just using something like points, or 3 points made, or like assists or something, is going to be kind of not that useful because it'll come up with the whole, like, every single individual value. And again, we can just show a little example here to see what that might look like. So yeah, so if you do points as the columns, you can see again, as before, there's now a column for every single individual decimal point, like point value. And again, it's not going to be kind of as useful as it was before. So one thing we can do is, let's try using team. There's 30 different teams, so this can kind of like help. You can kind of see like what position on which team like Like those are going to be the two attributes that we filter by. All right. And so now that we've created the sort of outline for the table, we want to move into the values on the inside. So as you might expect, values is going to be that attribute. Basically, again, you're going to choose a column from the original table, and then these values are going to be the main content, kind of like the heart of the table. Like this is what so you filtered by the rows and columns attribute, and then the values you pick here are going to be what values you actually see. So let's go ahead and pick something, right? So a really common one that you might want to think of is probably points, right? So we'll do points here. Maybe not sum, but we'll try average, right? So basically what this is saying is this is showing the average of points by position by team, right? So we can see here that among all the centers on Atlanta's team, they collectively average 6.66 points, right? And let's go over here and find a different one. So we can see here that of all the shooting guards, for example, on Chicago, collectively they average almost 10 points, you know? So these are a couple of things that we can kind of see. We can change points, we can add, let's see how many, assists they average. And again, you want to make sure that if you're looking for average, that you do go to average. And you can see that, point guard is the position that traditionally passes the most, right? They should get the most assists. And as you can kind of see by this table, the point guard column for all these guys is going to be more than the rest. So you can see that the point guards on Houston average more than all the other positions. The point guards on Denver do the same. Ooh, not actually. Looks like for Denver, their center is actually averaging more assists than the point guard position. So that's kind of interesting. Something that would be kind of really hard to derive from the original table is a lot easier to see in the context of the pivot table. And you can see here, for example, for the Lakers, their point guard is not actually averaging the most. It would be this row here, which is small forward. And this can kind of make sense. If you do watch the NBA, you would notice that, LeBron is the small forward, and he typically has the ball in his hands a lot, which can kind of explain why that position is averaging more assists than the rest. So now we can kind of see what filtering does. So filtering is an optional argument. This kind of filters the table by an even further value. So, what that can mean is here, say we want to filter by age, right? So right now it hasn't filtered anything because we're showing all items. But say I only want to find people who are, we'll only go for the young guys. So we'll get rid of all these people who are over 30. So we're only going to look at people who are in their 20s, or yeah, only people in their 20s. So we'll do that here. And now this is showing the average of assists by position by team, but only for those people who are between the age range 20 and 29. So as you can see, the values here have kind of changed a little bit. Some of these values you might expect to get a little lower or smaller based on how many people are on that team in those age ranges. But yeah, you can filter by any sort of thing here. We'll just put it back to normal. And there, now you can see that the table is back to how it originally was. All right, so that's kind of the basic functionality of the pivot table. There are some more advanced things that we can do. For example, we don't only have to have one row column here. So as we did before, we added age as a filter. Let's now check age and position. So that might work exactly how you expect. So in rows, instead of having just position, we'll also add age. And as you can see, the table has gotten a lot larger. Now, this might look a little intimidating at first, but don't worry, it's exactly how we explained it before. So now this is showing the center position by age and still showing the average of assists. So this is showing that 21-year-old centers on Atlanta average 0 assists, whereas 22-year-old centers on Atlanta average 0.6. Now, this might be a little, this isn't as useful as some of the other things because, there might not be more than one person in each age range, per position. But this is kind of just to show you some of the more advanced functionality of the pivot tables. And again, if this is looking a little too confusing, we can just drop that. And now we have our original table again. All right, so this is kind of how we use the different attributes here to kind of manipulate the data. And as you can see, one of the advantages that I mentioned previously is that you can instantly change this and you can instantly change what the table looks like, and you can see those changes reflected just like that. So I can sort by descending and you can see the table instantly changes. I can change assists average to the standard deviation of assists. You can see that change instantly. You can find the max, so you can see the best at each position, I guess. For example, the point guard on San Antonio or the point guard on Toronto averages 8.7 assists, whereas the average assists by point guard for Toronto is only 3.775. All right, and just kind of as a finishing touch, we'll show you what the suggestions do. So this was us making our table based on attributes that we had selected. But what Google Sheets actually does is a kind of useful thing is they have a suggested thing once you create your pivot table in the first place. This isn't like as useful, but it is kind of cool that they are able to kind of aggregate the values and do them in by itself. So we can see here, if you want to know the average of games played for each position, just click here. It'll create the table for you instantly. And this is showing you for the entire NBA. Centers play an average of 53 games. Point guards play an average of 50 games. Shooting guard, power forward plays an average of 70 games. It's kind of a weird position, so you might want to take this with a grain of salt. All the round numbers, you want to take them with a grain of salt because you know that it's probably only averaging between a very few amount of players. But yeah, we can delete these again too. There's a couple other suggestions. Number of unique teams for each position, count of each player for each position. This might be kind of useful. So you can see the position that has the most players in the NBA currently is the shooting guard position. There are 134 shooting guards throughout the entire NBA. There's 107 point guards, 104 power forwards, and so on and so on. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. This is kind of a intro to pivot tables in Excel. And again, it can get kind of confusing, especially with such a large data set. But one of the advantages of the pivot table is that it creates a really easy way for you to filter out values, aggregate values, however you want, and you can kind of change them instantly and see those changes reflected as quickly as you want. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. And next we'll see something else.